Hello, and welcome back to Mix Presents Sound for Film Award Season. I'm Tom Kenny, the editor for Mix, and we are here to talk about Top Gun Maverick. It's a fun film. It's a big film, and it reestablished theatrical playback in the United States almost single-handedly. It did wonders worldwide box office. And thank you, Paramount, for sponsoring this. We're here today with quite the team. Two of the supervising sound editors, Bjorn Ole Schroeder and Al Nelson, and two re-recording mixers, Mark Taylor and Chris Burdon. Thank you for joining me, gentlemen.
Thank you. Thanks for having us.
There's a lot of talk. People don't walk out of this film thinking about the dialogue, but this is a difficult dialogue job. Before we get into the fighter jets and stuff, I wanted to give a shout out to Mark Weingarten, who was a production sound mixer. And Bjorn, let's start with you and just give us an overview. I mean, do you have the comms in the fighter jets? Do you have the breathing and the grunts? What's this dialogue track like?
I'll try to represent as best as I can Mark Weingarten's job, who sadly couldn't be here with us today, who was the location sound mixer and had the very, very big challenge of getting actual recordings in the cockpits. And from all the chats that I've had with him, the most difficult part was dealing with the Navy and getting all of the technology inside the planes, because all the materials have to be approved. And I think one of the biggest challenges that he's had is that everything had to go, when they had an emergency, when they had to catapult out or eject out of the seat, all this stuff had to go with them. Nothing could be connected. So not to kind of bore you with technicalities too much, which I don't even know, they found like recorders small enough that record 2 channels of sound, and they could actually wire it into the mask and into the suit, and have that triggered at the same time with the remote cameras that were away from the seat, and they got the sound. And the one thing that the filmmakers were very happy with right from the start, so they would go up, they would basically at takeoff, they would hit the record button, all the cameras and the audio would trigger, and they wouldn't know what they got back until they landed. They got all the equipment back out. And at that time, they watched the rushes the same or the next day, and the producers and all the filmmakers were just incredibly happy with the sound that they got. It was just so realistic, and it's that sound that we always try to emulate. And of course, there's at the end of the day, there's quite a bit of ADR that we had to do for the films for the in-mass dialogue, but we're constantly chasing that sound to kind of just keep that realism. And I think I might hand it over to Chris, because Chris ended up mixing the dialogue in the final mix, and just kind of you guys did such a great job of kind of tweaking that balance between that realistic sound, but also making sure that you could always still hear the dialogues and connect with the dialogues, which I think is a fantastic achievement.
Chris, you want to take it over? Then we need to know what they're saying in order for their story. So,
as much as any other film, we knew that we wanted to hear every single line in this movie. There was going to be no compromise on that. That came down from the filmmakers through Eddie Hamilton, picture editor. We've worked together before, and hopefully he knows that that's something that I'm aiming for sound-wise. And you can divide up this film into more traditional sounds in rooms, and Mark did a great job. We had the rich sound of the actors and the whole right across the board, just great sound to get that I could get into comfortably EQ and get a really rich sound. Great voices, John Hamm, just Ed Harris, you've got all these guys, Tom Cruise. So that was a great starting point. But leading back to the complex technical stuff in the helmet, which is such a huge part of the story and guiding us through narratively and emotionally and everything. As Bjorn said, we had the original recordings, and then had the luxury that behind the masks and in the helmet and the way it was shot, you could introduce a lot of ADR and recordings after the event. And so the task really was to get those sounding as authentic as possible and matching them to the original sync recordings, which had a authentic distortion to them. And then I often had 3 variants of dialogue in the helmets, a clean EQ track that gave me the pure clarity, and then I'd have 2 different types of distortion, plus a sort of a very tight reverberant space, and that would always be my 3 variants plus some limiting, and really sometimes the levels were incredibly close to digital peak in the big sequences, and you just wanted it to be articulate. So it was often the case that even within the same actor, you were just searching for something different line per line, slightly more clarity, slightly less distortion, and that was always the shape throughout the movie. And that was one of the more technical aspects of doing the dialogues. Everything else is a shape throughout the film in terms of levels and emotional and the space and use of reverb and so on. But that was the big technical job for me.
Oh, sorry, Sarah, Tom. It's like I guess like when you kind of come back to like all like the importance of all the grunts and the breaths and everything to kind of build tension. There's just like that really great sequence, like once they catapult off and they go for what we call the bomb run sequence. And we have all the different pilots, and like Tom Cruise's character, Maverick, he's still quite calm, composed. We kind of cut to his cockpit, it's just like really nice, quiet silence from the effects. And then we cut to the other pilots, which are actually a combination of like ADR breaths. And those are actually some of the real recordings of them being in those fighter jets, kind of just breathing really heavily. And then it kind of switches over to kind of the more energetic, really kind of efforts that you have with Tom Cruise, that I believe were just, we did all in ADR afterwards. For him, just to kind of build and build and build that tension. You can kind of switch that over, and it's one of my favorite sequences in the film.
Just to finish off, I often had to push even more into sort of modulating noise in amongst those breaths to really give them a grit and realism. So we could push the kind of compression and really dirty those breaths up to really get that kind of intensity in the cockpit.
Well, they fit in really nice because the cockpit can't be a very quiet environment. I can't imagine that it's too quiet there, eliminating noise. Let's go back into the cockpit then and move on to effects if we could. Al, could you walk me through, Al, Bjorn, how we're getting the sounds of these jets? I presume there are microphones in the planes. I presume you set people up to get production-like recordings. It sure feels like it. So do you want to tell me?
The first surprise is that the cockpits are incredibly quiet. Surprisingly. And we were all
the sounds behind. Yeah.
Yeah. We were all surprised with that. Even, somewhat quieter than than your standard commercial jet. They're well sealed up. They've got to pull a lot of G's and they've got to be, well structured. So, as Bjorn mentioned, Mark would rig these systems up, and they would just hit record. The actors would actually hit the record button, which would start both camera and sound. And then they would roll for 30 minutes at a time. And so we got all of that great material. And the actual ambient sound of the jets sounds like you're in a quiet car, which was really great because we got good, clean production sound. In addition, one of the great treats was being able to go through and pull a lot of communications and a lot of the sort of the beeps and the tones and the various other special nuances that you could only get by being on an actual fighter jet as opposed to being on a gimbal or something that is artificial. This is the real deal.
And yet you have to, and maybe you can address this, Mark, you have to sort of build it as you accelerate, as you go into, Mach 10 at the beginning, as you go up into high G's, there's a definite roar. Is that all embellished, or is that from the real?
It's embellished and real. So, basically, as the guys were saying, most of the interiors throughout the movie are pretty quiet. To help protect the dialogue, and B, because they were quiet. But when we go outside, they're nice and loud.
And all of the jet sounds were added. So there's other than the occasional magic moment, such as the thrusters before the final launch off the carrier. There's a few other moments where we're able to get some production sound integrated into the sound of the jets. But overall, the jets all had to be designed and cut and added in post. There weren't microphones outside of the jet, and if there were, they would have been destroyed. So anything from inside the jet was mostly just tones and beeps and PA and things like that. There wasn't a lot of actual jet sound. So all of the onboard jet tones that you hear, all of the exterior jet thrusts, all of that was done in editorial, and then of course mixed magnificently by Mark and his team.
One of the great things was one of the recordings. Like it was a pleasant surprise of all the location was. I'm not sure we're allowed to say this or not, but Bitching Betty, as they called the pilots called it. Al, do you want to talk about Bitching Betty?
We were fortunate. One of the first excursions we did, my colleague Benny Burdon and I, we went out into the Atlantic on the USS Abraham Lincoln onto an aircraft carrier, and we spent a week there. I'll kind of rewind and say, from my perspective, one of the things that made this project so special and the experience so wonderful sonically and also so successful was that the filmmakers, all the filmmakers from the very beginning, from the producers, Joe Kaczynski, the director, they were very invested in getting us out and recording and collecting. And early on, before the script was even finished, we were off recording as much material as we could. And one of these first events was going out to the aircraft carrier, the USS Abraham Lincoln, where we had F-18s and F-35s amongst other aircraft all coming and going throughout the week. And one of the other bonuses was to sit and just speak with pilots, speak with the men and the women who fly these jets and ask them questions. What is it that you hear when you're up there, and what's it like? And what's it like to, to pull these Gs? And, ask them, what do you hear when you're in the cockpit? Do you have beeps and tones and radar and all these things? And is it just overwhelming? And I said, we turn all that off. But one of the things that they are paying attention to is something that everyone in aircraft and naval history refers to as Bitchin' Betty, and she goes way back. I have to look up exactly when she was first introduced, but over many series of aircraft. And she's a woman who worked at Lockheed Martin, and at a certain point, they discovered as they were outfitting the jets that they needed something more than just an alert. Beeps and tones to let the pilot know that something dangerous was happening or was going to happen. And they needed a voice. And so they auditioned a variety of, people that came in. And in the end, it was, one of the people who worked there, this woman, Betty, and she would say things like, pull up, which you hear many times in the film, engine fire left, engine fire right, quite a number of other phrases that as the pilots recounted to me, when you hear bitchin' Betty,
too low.
Yeah. Altitude. When you hear bitchin' Betty, you better listen to her or you're dead. And so that was an interesting discovery and something that we ended up integrating into the film to, again, give it a realism. If pilots, and I've spoken to many pilots who are watching this film, they believe that it's represented pretty authentically, and that's because we had the opportunity to do some R&D, and that's thanks to the filmmakers who gave us those opportunities.
Well, Chris, talk to me a little bit as we wrap up here about the music. I understand it was done, the film was largely done before the pandemic, and then the music was done in isolation. Can you talk to me first about how the music was done and then how you're able to play with it in that sequence?
Yeah, I mean, we had the challenge of we were unable to get a large ensemble together with simple social distancing. We were very early on in lockdown, and kudos really to the team going from the composers through the final composer who did a lot of the work at that point was Lorne Balfe, sort of curating a whole series of melodic elements and everything, and combining as much of the real instrumentation as he could do. And for example, there'd be cellists all playing separately, individually, and then they would be mixed together to create the sound of the rich low end of the orchestra. And it was elements like that, building layer upon layer, where in the past, pre-pandemic, post-pandemic, you get a whole orchestra in a room and get the whole thing recorded with all of the multiple mics. There was real kind of constraints on that. So it was about layering, and it was about the skill of the mixers, and then editing through Cecile Tournesac as the main music editor on the stage, just really building up this classic. Anybody who knows the sort of Hans Zimmer and Lorne Balfe school of mixing and composition will know that when you get the final product, you get something really fantastic, rich sonically, that is a combination of real instruments, synthesizers, and, you know, the brass. If you take an example, you get the combination of the real brass and some synthetic brass, synth brass, and it just gives you this wonderful, rich depth that you can play with. And as a music mixer, I'm trying to, again, you know, using the shape, as Mark has intimated, we would have good shape editorially from Eddie and the filmmakers. It would be Tom and Chris and Joe would have talked about how they want to approach a sequence and have ideas of what they want to, where they want to maybe go more music and less sound effects, and then the other way around. And I think Mark's term, where the music reveals in this movie, is where it was wonderful for me as a music mixer that I could just hold that music composition down. I could use the surround elements of the music to create a lovely sound stage that just supported something, a scene emotionally or an action sequence, but I didn't have to go crazy with level. And then, as we wanted to transition to, you know, to really use either as a dramatic, you know, in the sequence where there's this wonderful wide shot with all the comms going on and the ground to air missiles just crashing, you know, they're stuff that look like they're going to be wiped out by the enemy. There's just this fantastic combination of music, everything going full bore. And then we release again and we change tack again in terms of the relative balance of all the elements. You know, one of my favorite things is post, you know, when they realize that Maverick's been hit, and there's this beautiful sequence of the blue of the control room of John Hamm and Hondo, and the emotional shift there when they realize Maverick, they think Maverick might be down and gone. And it's just, again, it reveals that the dynamics of the movie allow us to go into that space, having just gone to this crazy loud action-packed sequence. And then that just reveals, and I just find it so moving that, you know, certain things just sort of evolved. One of my favorite things is you know, some of the quieter sequences within this incredible closing third of the movie, which just keeps stepping up the intensity. Yeah. It's, so yeah, musically there were some compromises, but I felt, as I said, through all the skill level of all the people that were providing it to the stage, I just love that stuff. It's just, I feel, you know, it's a lucky circumstance that I'm sitting there with that stuff under the faders, and I can play and I can adapt, and I can use certain elements to keep the energy low end bass going through dialogue so it won't interfere with dialogue, and I can keep energy and so on, because I've got all the lovely separation of elements on the music.
Yeah, Chris, you'll probably never have a film again that was where you had so much separation as on this one, right? It's probably, you'll never get that again.
Yeah, you're right.
Well, we're out of time. I'd like to give you a last chance, last word.
What a great opportunity to work on this film. You know, as Chris said, we were very fortunate, and I'm most grateful, first of all, that, you know, we had the opportunity, but in the end, it opened up the theaters, and it happened at a time, it was a tough time when it was meant to be released, and we were all like, what's going to happen? Is this thing ever going to make it in a theater? Will people ever go to the movies again? You know, there was this long pause of anxiety. And then, you know, summer 22, it blew up and people went back to the theaters. And I'm so grateful and proud to have been part of a film that was so successful in returning folks back into the seats and in community.
That's right. I have to say, like, there was a lot of anxiety for all of us to see, like, how is this film going to come? When is it ever going to come out? But that kind of makes me go, like, full circle back. I remember it was, like, I think, like, early 2019. And I got at Skywalk at our screening, I got, like, a very, very early screening all on my own to go see the film before we really started working on it. And I was just amazed by the footage, and I just knew I was going to work on something really special because it was all real. Like, I mean, people just keep on talking about this was all, like, you know, like real flying sequence. And when we saw that, there was barely any CGI work that still needed to be done. And I just knew that's going to be really, really special when we started that film. And I remember just sitting there like in awe. I just couldn't believe it, because we like, all of us, we work on so many films. And when we see that early cut, we're like, sometimes we're asking ourselves like, what's going on? And with this film, it was just like right from the get-go, you knew you're working on something special.
This film is the catalyst for more people to go back to the cinema and enjoy movies in IMAX. I think hopefully more people will present movies in IMAX and Dolby Atmos, because it's an experience.
Yeah, this is one of those films where the team, right through the filmmakers, through all the different departments, and then through to dealing with the main man in Tom Cruise, we wanted it to be. We talked so much about emotion and the story and his story. And what is the most gratifying, exciting thing, we waited 2 years and then started to see people's responses and friends and family. And they're crying, laughing, crying, on the edge of their seat for half an hour at a time, gripping the seat, talking about every reaction that we wanted. And that was something that in a perfect sort of symmetry of what we wanted, and then the audience got it, and as Al said, brought people back to the cinema and put smiles on their faces, and they walk out of that having seen Top Gun, just mesmerized, and just think it was stunning.
And then they came back and saw it again and again and again. So thank you.
Yeah, I tell you, on the bombing run, even though I knew they were going to do the invert and go down, I still grabbed my seat when they did it. I mean, I knew it was coming, and it still made me jump. Well, thank you, gentlemen. I much appreciate it. A wonderful, wonderful track on a fantastic film. And good luck during the Oscar shortlist voting. And all of you out there, please go vote.
Thank you, Tom.
Thank
you, everyone.
Thank you. We appreciate. Thank you for your time.